Well, we're here at Ogilvie Cemetery. Now, here again, this is on the Duval County side, just before you cross over into Nassau County. And it's not a huge cemetery. There may be a couple of hundred people buried out here, and I've got I think it's a great grandfather that's buried out here. Now, there's some of the Hickenbottoms are buried out here too. Hickenbottoms were a big family. Wingets were a big family. But this cemetery is kind of long and narrow, and a lot of ground here unused. Now, the Ogilvies were a pretty good size family, and they were well, I don't know whether you call them wealthy or not. They were what you would call land poor. They owned a lot of acreage out in this part of the country. In fact, in the 70s, when they decided to build an international airport here in Jacksonville, we had a small airport out here on the north side called Imison Airport. But the runways weren't long enough to equip the more modern planes that were coming along. So they decided to build a bigger airport. So the city come out here and found this land out here that the Ogilvies had, and so the Ogilvies sold them a big piece of property out here for the airport, and they made quite a bit of money off of that. But the Ogilvies were good friends with my family, and that's a nice marker there in memory of the Geiger relatives and friends whose markers are lost. Memorial Day 1976. Now, I pronounce that Geiger. My grandfather pronounced it Gigger. So I don't know which is. I know I went to school with a boy and he pronounced it Geiger. But like I say, my grandfather for some reason pronounced it Gigger. But there's some of the Giggers or Geigers that are buried out here. The Terrells, or Terrell. Here again, that's another, I've known several people with that spelling of their last name. And I've known some that said Terrell and some that said Terrell. So you make that distinction on your own. People kind of have their own way of doing things. And names and pronunciations change over time. So, now these are the graves we come out to see today. Now, John H. Williams, and here again we got another name here, Houston or Houston. Here again I've heard it pronounced both ways. Houston's Company, Kilcrease, Florida Light Infantry, CSA. Now, I know John H. Williams, if I'm not mistaken, was born around 1828, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in that area. He fought in the war between the states. Now, the kill crease actually designates a part of the Army, you might want to say, or whatever. A lot of them were up around South Carolina. They were from around that part of the country. And there was part of them that were down here in Florida. And they were pretty much out of Tallahassee. Now, John H. Williams, he was born, another one that was born up around Traders Hill, Georgia. Which ain't, here again, it ain't far. Everything around here is close to Traders Hill. But he was born up in Traders Hill. But he lived most of his life between Nassau County and Duval County. Fought in the war between the states. Now, he was married to Lydia Wingate, who's buried at Eubanks Cemetery. And that's the Wingate connection. And their son, or one of their sons, I believe they had 10 or 11 kids, was my great-great-grandfather, Walter Williams, who is also buried over at Eubanks Cemetery. Now, why John H. is buried here and Lydia's buried there, I don't know. It couldn't have been a convenience thing, because John H. Williams, when he died, he was living in New Berlin. Now, New Berlin's where we went to Fort Yellow Bluff and the New Berlin Cemetery where the big anchor was at. So he died over there, and that's a pretty good little drive from here. So it wasn't a convenience factor. So I don't know why he's buried here and she's buried there. I know a lot of the Wingates are buried where she's at. But the only other connection with this cemetery is the fact that John H.'s brother, Christopher Columbus Williams, and his wife is buried next to him. And I'm actually wrong about that. That is not his brother. That is actually his son and his daughter-in-law, not his brother. But they're buried out here next to him. But unless he was just good friends with the Ogilvies and he wanted to be buried out here for some reason, I'm not sure why he was buried out here. But I have that question a lot with people. I understand if people remarry, a lot of times why they're buried in different places. But when you only have one husband or wife, I know a lot of times it had to do with convenience and embalming purposes and having to do the movement of a body. Because usually you try to get people into the ground pretty quick after they passed away. But About the only way to preserve, short of embalming, which most people couldn't afford, was ice. They would have a tray filled with ice that they would set the coffin or casket in and keep them in their living rooms a lot of times. And that's where they would have a wake. Now, there's another one of our familiar Wisdom of the World, 1875 to 1917, Jesse Franklin Atkinson. Now we have some Johnsons that are buried here. I do have Johnsons in my family. They're on my daddy's side of the family. And I know I keep saying it, but sometime in the future, I did do my grandparents and great-grandparents at Dinsmore, but to do any more justice as far as cemeteries go to my Davis side of the family, I've got to go up just south of Atlanta to do any filming. And my direct Davis family, they're in Douglasville, Georgia, in the city cemetery up there. And I've been wanting to go to the Big House Museum in Macon anyway, so here in the near future I may take a drive up that way. I know I keep threatening to, but I haven't done it yet. Here in a few weeks, now we've just had New Year's come around, and we're going to have they'll have the reenactment at the battle, though last year, the Battle of Ocean Pond. And I definitely want to go over there and film a lot of that. Now this is where we get into a lot of the older part of the cemetery is back in this end. And this is the Ogilvie family for the most part that's buried back here. Now here we've got David Ogilvie, born in Edinburgh, Scotland, May of 1819 to April of 1881. So, and Jane Mason is buried unusually in line with him as opposed to next to him. Usually find a husband and wife buried next to each other. But in this particular case, they are buried in a line with each other. We've got a couple of real nice monuments there. Abram E. Ogilvie and Martha, 1859 for both of them. And Abram passed away in 34, and she passed away in 1912. And here's another older marker. Well, apparently Mr. David Ogilvie had two wives. Now, I've never seen this name before. Lourannah, L-O-U-R-A-N-A-H, Lourannah. It doesn't have a maiden name, but it does have wife of David Ogilvie, and the Jane Mason over there also has wife of David Ogilvie. Now, This one died in 86, and that one died in 1890. So this one passed away first, then he passed away, and then she passed away. So maybe that's the reason for their alignment here. Allen Ogilvie, born 1860, died 1900. Never seen a marker made quite like that. Very ornate. Sweetly resting. But it's definitely a carved stone, but it looks like square bricks with a placard on it, but it's all definitely one piece. Over here, more Ogilvies. Here's an older one here. David Walter Ogilvie. Now, you got David Walter. Now, my great-grandpa was Walter. Was his name, Walter Williams. Now, maybe my grandpa was named after David Walter. It's also my grandfather's middle name. But maybe that's another tie into the Ogilvie family to the Williams family. Lucinda Turner, wife of Stephen Ogilvie and her husband, 1854 to 1910. And we've got some very ornate stones over here. William. Now there's David Oscar Ogilvie, 1847 to 1914. Now, he was the father of Oscar Ogilvie that owned the land when they sold it to the airport out here. So that would have been his dad. It's a broken stone. That's a shame. But all of this is Ogilvie's back here in the corner. There's a ray there, and a ray here. But all the rest of this is pretty much Ogilvie's, and you can usually tell a well-to-do family from a struggling family a lot of times by their headstones, with the exception of those that go back. A ways. You had a much better headstone if you had a little bit of money to spend on it. Now, Oscar Preston Ogilvie, 1890 to 1957. That's Oliver Preston, excuse me. Now that's a ornate gun given in tribute to O.P. Ogilvie on his retirement from National Container Corporation. Okay. It's kind of a kind of a weird inscription to put on a headstone, that he was given a gun in tribute to his retirement. That is definitely a new one. Most people get watches, but Mr. Oliver Preston got a gun on his retirement from Container. Now, Container Corporation was a very big. We had St. Regis, and they call it Container Can. You had St. Regis, Container Can. You had Rayonier, St. Regis. They all owned land aplenty up in this part of the country. And for the most part, it was the paper business. They would take and cut down pine trees and make it into pulp. And that's what they used to call pulpwood. If lumber wasn't good enough to be turned into, or trees weren't good enough to be turned into lumber or such things, then they were made into pulp to make paper out of. So, like I said, this is a very small family cemetery. I see absolutely no recent burials out here at all. Oh, I don't know when the last time somebody may have been buried out here. It looks like this road is rather well used. Maybe I missed something out here. Now, the rays over there, those are newer stones, but still, most of these people were buried out here some time ago. I guess this is just people coming out, in and out to clean the cemetery. It is very well kept, cut, trimmed. Tillis West. I don't know whether I looked at this before or not before I close this one out. The Burney family had their own little enclosed spot here. Have a couple of military stones. Usually military stones like this are not flat, except in certain cemeteries where they have rules about headstones and what their size, shape, and dimension can be, whether they can be ornate or plain. Some you don't get more than a medallion on the top of the ground. So anyway, like I said, this was just, I needed to make this trip over here. It had been a long time since I'd come over here and paid tribute to my great-great-great-grandfather. And I do think about him quite often, as I do. Because that's the one thing about genealogy and not forgetting people. When you're going through all your genealogy, you see these names all the time popping up. So you definitely don't forget about them because you see them all the time. I have nobody really to pass this on to because nobody's really interested in genealogy anymore, you know. But like I've said before, I'm a firm believer in remembering the past. So from this peaceful respite out here, I'm gonna once again thank you people for watching this video. Like, subscribe if you want to. Make a comment if you want to. And don't forget that I appreciate you doing it and taking time. So God bless you and y'all have a great day now.